TCL is a proud sponsor of the 1500 ESPN studios. TCL, America's fastest growing TV brand.
I can't tell you how much I enjoyed saying touch 'em all.
Way back and gone! Touch 'em all, Joe Mauer!
And now these guys are making it relevant to this year's Twins.
Now, our two resident hardball nerds will attempt to touch 'em all on the week's news surrounding the Twins in MLB. Here's Phil Mackey and Derek Wetmore.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Touch 'em All podcast. I'm Derek Wetmore. Special guest is Dan Hayes, who covers the Twins for The Athletic. Dan, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. After last week's craziness, but
yeah.
We knew it was going to come down like that, didn't we?
100%.
And it was definitely a crazy week because honestly, going in, I would have gone 50-50 on Rocco Baldelli or Brandon Hyde, and so it was sort of like you didn't know which way they were going. You knew who they were talking to, but they did a good job of kind of keeping that stuff under wraps.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say it, Dan, because when you say crazy, I think you're talking World Series. You're talking manager search. It's been a crazy week, 10 days for Major League Baseball, for the Twins. I want to talk about the World Series teams a little bit during this podcast about, the Twins naturally want to get to that conversation. They're not in that conversation right now. But I do think we have to start with the new manager, if that's all cool with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so give me your take on it. I saw you at the press conference, and from my perspective, Rocco was impressive in the press conference. And my favorite part, Dan, was his willingness to say, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure how we're going to fix Byron Buxton and Miguel Sano or Max Kepler. I got to meet these guys first before I could even answer that question. Were you as impressed as I was with his intro presser?
Absolutely. I mean, look, he came in and he made it very clear what he's about. And that's a guy who isn't going to be the end-all, be-all. I think he will, essentially, but he knows that he doesn't know everything. And just who the person is really came off there. I mean, every question that was asked had a thoughtful answer attached to it. You could see it. It was a very thorough answer, and he didn't dismiss anything. I loved when Pat Royce threw that opener question at him and totally just trying to mess with them.
Yes.
And Royce playing the heel exactly as he always does, and the way he handled it was hilarious. And he gave it an actual answer, and it was so well orchestrated by him for a guy who has probably never. Well, maybe he held a press conference to announce his retirement, but I mean, for a guy who really is not in front of the microphone, he seemed comfortable in his own way and really came off well. I mean, it was a good press conference given all that's going on, and people in there clapping and stuff like that. A lot of room for distraction and I don't know. I really think that with basically everything that he brings from everything you talked to everybody else about, that they did a good job. And obviously none of us knows.
Sure.
We can all in 3 years be like, oh, well, I saw some things then I didn't think I'd like, and nobody knows. When it comes down to it, it's just going to be what he does, and he made a great first impression, and I think that's what stood out.
Yeah, in fact, I think this is the first time I've come into contact with Rocco, but it's interesting for me, my sort of timeline in baseball, and I'll ask you yours too. Get ready for it. Where were you in 2005? But I'm sitting here thinking that's right around the time that I started to get interested in prospects. It's a little bit before I was into these funny numbers we now call sabermetrics. Probably a couple of years before that, when I'd read Moneyball and then started reading Fangraphs, every single thing they published. And that, to me, is really interesting that now just what seems like a short time later, now this guy's not only been out of baseball for 7-8 years, he's now manager of the Minnesota Twins. It's kind of an interesting, not to relate everything to my story, but it is an interesting parallel there. Do you know off the top of your head where you were in 2005, Dan?
In 2005 I was in San Diego.
Yeah.
And I wasn't. I was covering Little League, so I was not.
Dude, you told me some cool stories about that job, though.
Yeah, I went to Little League World Series, so it was great. I was 20. I was how old was I that year? I was 28. I made the team. I was the pitcher, and it was a really good experience. So, no, I jumped on it following a team, and they went all the way. They lost in the U.S. Championship. It was pretty cool. But yeah, my baseball knowledge was. I mean, I've been a baseball fan forever.
Yeah.
I remember when he came around and just the first couple of years, how amazing he was. And those were some pretty bad Rays teams. I think they won fewer than 70 games his first year. Probably was about the same the next year. But he was just so good, and it stood out on these really horrible teams. And, he sits out 05 and, the slow, I think he never played 100 games above that.
Isn't that crazy?
Such a rough ending to his career, just stuff out of his control after a great first 2 seasons, especially for, someone so young and inexperienced and with all the tools he had. And I mean, he was beloved by the baseball world going in, and the way those first 2 years started with nothing around him, really, he made it look like it was going to be a lot of fun, and it was kind of sad the way it kept going after that, just because, and it's nothing he could really do about it.
Right. Well, and I mistakenly classified it on a previous podcast, so just to correct it for the listeners, I'd read somewhere that they were terming it a mitochondrial disorder, where his cells just weren't producing the necessary energy. And since then, I've read more recent pieces that are like, no, that might have been a rush to judgment. That might have been a little too quick to say. That it's almost still a mysterious thing. And Dan, in the press conference, Pat asked him about it. Pat called it the disease. He said, "Is the disease that robbed your playing career? Does it still affect you today?" And Rocco, I don't blame anyone ever for not answering something like that head on. But basically, he said, "Well, I take better care of myself now than I did when I was 25." But I don't know that I really have all the answers for what afflicted him. Do we know more about that?
No,
Okay.
We really don't.
Okay.
But his answer in just that knowing he has to take care of himself obviously shows he's got to monitor this, but it obviously not, like he mentioned, not playing, not diving all over the field, not running around out of control probably helps considerable amount. And I doubt he's going to become the first. NFL coaches wear suits sometimes, or used to wear suits on the sideline.
Sure.
I don't think Rocco's going to become the first manager to run out and and dive and get his jersey dirty, unless he's kicking some dirt across the plate or something.
Well, I was wondering if, a couple times a year, 25-man roster limitations, could he pinch hit for himself if it came to? I always wondered that with Molitor too. Like, could he still catch up to some of junk baller and be one of the better hitters in the Twins lineup? It looked like in September maybe that was a possibility.
I mean, he was definitely in good enough shape, but velocity now, man.
Yeah, little different. But Rocco Baldelli, interesting managerial choice, as you mentioned. They'd kind of narrowed it down. You guys were out in front of that, and there's just, I think they went in the right kind of direction. And now, next step, coaching staff, that will probably be settled relatively shortly because you'd like to get going on free agency. The next step after that, probably, Dan, is get on a plane headed for either Baxley, Georgia, or Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. Where do you think Rocco Baldelli should go first?
I think Baxley, Georgia, right away. I mean, honestly, look, Byron, there's so many things about last year that really were tough for him, and a lot of it was out of his control. He just couldn't stay healthy there. Part of it, the Twins made it sound like they weren't satisfied with the hitting, which is why they didn't bring him up.
Yeah, okay.
It was just, it was a kind of just a big mess the whole year.
Yes.
And I think it's one of the few areas that I was kind of felt critical of what the Twins were doing. I really like what the Twins in general do as a front office. I didn't like the way that, Byron Buxton got handled, just because this is a guy that is absolutely your guy going forward. And who knows if he will ever live up to lofty expectations. I'm nowhere near ready to say that's impossible, because there's just too much talent there.
No, agreed.
And so when you think about it that way, I mean, if this is going to be your guy and you have done to him, I mean, one thing that we couldn't really bring up, but I mean, it had to have killed him to not be able to be there for Joe's catching too. I mean, there's so many things that he had taken away this year, in part because he couldn't be healthy, but in part because they didn't let him come back. And so that's the first guy without question.
Sure.
I'm on the plane. I mean, first of all, it's an easier flight.
Yeah. Maybe Atlanta and then a little rental car situation.
Yeah, exactly. Country. But I mean, in both cases, I think, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Those guys are your future. And Miguel, I mean, but maybe with him, it's Florida also because Miguel, I know is going to check in with the team, but he wants to do face-to-face. That's really smart. You're taking over for a guy who is a legend, and the team won under him last year, and so it's important to get out there and start these relationships. And I have a feeling he's going to do just fine with this. I mean, come on, he's 37.
Sure.
And Lavelle was joking last week. It's the first manager that he's covered that's younger than him, and I'm like, okay, dude. Hey, for me, this is something that matters. Okay, Lavelle's got 10 years on me.
Right.
This is bound to happen at some point. For me, man, I feel really old right now.
Heck, Judd's point was, if we feel old now, shouldn't we have gone back and really had that moment of reckoning when Derek Falvey was hired at 13 years old? Shouldn't that have been at the day?
You know what? When he gets his driver's license, he's going to be a real threat.
I think you're right. I think Buxton is an important relationship. And I think one thing that's kind of gone maybe under the radar is not fair because we haven't had a ton of time to unpack this, but there were a number of fans, Dan, that I got on social media that said, mostly Twitter, because Facebook, my Facebook page is fairly rational and my podcast listeners are all rational. Twitter is more of a 50-50 proposition. But one of the things that you saw was that the hitting coach screwed him up. And I counter by saying, I'm not arguing Buxton had a problem, whether it was mechanical or just his mental approach, I don't know. But all I'm saying is he had a big contact problem, and I know the Twins are going to try to work on that even as early as before spring training. But if you think the manager's on the hot seat, look no further than the fact that he got an interview for the open manager position.
I know. And also throw in the fact, he got an interview with the Los Angeles Angels. So
yeah,
2 spots. And last week talking to Dad and Derek and everyone, there was a lot of praise for both James Rowson and Derek Shelton. And they definitely want those guys back as part of the coaching staff. The rest of the coaching staff, it is completely up in the air. But if they could have their way, they would take them back. As Dad said, we saw these guys as managerial candidates, and if we could get both of them back, it would be tremendous to have 3 potential managerial candidates on there. So,
yeah.
James Rowson's communication skills are fantastic, and yes, there's a component to being a hitting coach that is technical, but just as much of it is being a psychologist. And look, he had 12 healthy games to be around Byron last year. 28 overall.
Crazy.
That's it. That's crazy when you think about it. But it comes down to 12 healthy games in April when the weather's bad and you're just getting going. And Byron was not where they want him to be early on. There's no question. There's work to be done. It's a project for sure. But look no further than Aaron Hicks as to why you hang on to guys that can play center field and have the bat potential. Because if Byron even is a 250 hitter with his speed and gets on base around 320, that wouldn't be fun offensively, but at the same time, he'd make the most of it and still be probably a 3.5 win player.
Sure. And, maybe he's more Jackie Bradley Jr. than he is Mookie Betts, but both of those guys have a World Series ring.
They do. Did Jackie Bradley Jr. do okay in the postseason? Oh, yes, he did. Yes. After all that crap that he took.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. What a great ALCS for him.
Awesome.
And, it's funny. It was in South Carolina on Friday night, and we're walking around the baseball stadium, and there was some Jackie Bradley Jr. Memorabilia everywhere.
Sure.
As he was he was there for 2 of their World Series victories.
Well, popular guy. And rightfully so. He plays such a good center field, and that's Buxton. I would put Buxton a class above Jackie Bradley Jr., but that's having not seen enough of JBJ, really. It's more based on the just having experienced Buxton at peak Buxton and saying, this guy doesn't need to hit that much at all. Of course, then there's this lurking possibility that he also hits someday, and then you've got one of those perennial all-star players that can really be a driving force for the fairly young Twins nucleus.
Absolutely. I mean, that position is so hard to fill, and
Ask
if
Jake
you
Cave.
got that, you run with it if you've got that.
Right. I think you can look no further than Jake Cave, who's a talented player, pretty decent outfielder, and had good offensive numbers in his short stint with the Twins. Or I shouldn't even say short stint, in his one season with the Twins. But still looked a little overmatched in center field at times. So like I'm saying that as a praise for Buxton, not a criticism for Jake, that here's a good young player, and even he wasn't quite up to the center field standard, and especially when compared with Buxton, it looked bad at times.
Yeah, no, I mean, you have very few guys that can do it, and Kepler was pretty decent.
Sure,
but
decent,
I mean,
compared to Buxton, still looks leaves something to be desired.
You know what? I actually think Kepler could be fine, would be out there.
Okay.
He'd probably be above average, a tick above it.
Okay,
but I mean, he definitely has the skill set. Some of it was a little different, but yeah, you're right. Cave had his moments where it was really good, and he had some moments where it wasn't so good, and he could fill in, and he's a guy I'd feel comfortable putting out there for 15 days if someone went on the DL or 10 now, whatever.
Sure.
But I wouldn't, long term, I like Jake Cave to be able to play all three spots and move around for me and bring that bat off the bench.
Yeah, I'm almost curious where that one's going to go. This dovetails pretty well into talking about free agency quick, or trades, whatever, but Twins off-season needs, because I almost view like Jake Cave just about surpassed Max Kepler, if not surpassed, in terms of the depth chart. Obviously, that's not how it played out, because with Buxton not there and Rosario being hurt for most of September, it was really easy to get both their bats in when you wanted to. But Kepler had his third sort of good, not great season in a row, and didn't take that full step forward that we were expecting for him this year. I'm not saying Jake Cave is necessarily your opening day right fielder or anything like that. What I'm saying is I think outfield is fairly well covered if the Twins don't make another move. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Kepler, that's the one part, I look at this offseason, it's complex because, look, obviously Eddie Rosario is your guy and you're satisfied. But when you look at their young guys, their core guys, and I do believe they'll continue to go forward with them, you're right. Kepler's sort of at that point where, when's the breakthrough happening? Is there going to be a breakthrough offensively? The defense is there. It's outstanding. And he made some good strides as far as the walk to strikeout ratio this last year. I mean, he's striking out a lot less. He's walking more. He's getting on base. That's a good thing. When does he get to that point where he's just, we see it. I mean, he hits the ball so hard, and he hits them into shifts. And is it getting your pitch in different spots? Is it, expanding your zone to being more aggressive? I know that being more aggressive was talked about a lot with him this last year.
Sure. And
it didn't quite happen. It would happen at times, and he was just streaky, but he's another guy I just don't know that you can give up on, given all that talent, given how young he is. But he does start to get much more expensive, and so you wonder, do they move forward, or do they consider moving him and getting another position covered?
Yeah.
I mean, he's getting expensive, but he's a guy that still teams want. There's teams out there that think they can solve him, and that was the case last year. And you know what? Those Tampa Bay Rays rumors last year that they would definitely include him for Archer, they are true. They were true. When a team like the Rays is saying, "Hey, we want this guy," to me, that's a telltale sign to be like, no. We're good with this asset. Thank you for checking, though.
Sure.
We're full. But I mean, when a team like the Rays thinks, "Hey, there's stuff we can do that will help him tap into that potential. There's more to unlock here," it lets you know how valuable he is.
Yeah.
And so, do you take one more shot? Because look, you just never want to be the team that gives up on a guy. I mean, it's not for a lack of work. The effort is there. the desire is there. He's so committed that maybe it's almost like he's overcommitted. Like, there's something there that maybe holds him back in that way. I mean, he talked about it a little bit. He loved how Fernando Rodney keeps it loose. And I think that him finding some way to do that could help a little bit. I mean, he's the kind of guy, you see it, where it's sometimes that 0 for 4 probably wears on him more than you should allow it to in baseball.
Yeah.
It's just it's such a love and desire to do well. And I think it wears on him sometimes. And so he's got to get to that point where he finds that. And I don't know. I mean, do you move on and get something of value and take the risk that you're going to lose out on a great player, or do you give him more time? It really is not an easy position to be in.
Yeah, to me, Dan, it boils down to what's behind door number 2, because in a vacuum, you'd be perfectly comfortable. Maybe perfectly comfortable is an overstatement, but you'd feel pretty good if you think you're going to get the good Buxton and you think healthy Rosario's coming back, because he really took a nosedive the final 2 months of the season, but I blame some injury for that. So you feel pretty good about those 2 spots, or as good as you can feel. And then in right, if it's Jake Cave and Max Kepler duking it out, that's probably okay. But if you're going to trade, so from a position of perceived strength, even if it wasn't great in 2018, you still like those guys. If you're going to trade an outfielder to try to address, let's say either shortstop or second base, depending on what you think about Polanco, or maybe you think you have to firm up catcher or first base. Again, there's all these other variables that are playing into this. To me, it's if you got an outfielder that you love and that you're going to go get, then it makes a lot more sense to move on for Max Kepler. But if you're just kicking to kick, I'm not sure I make that move. If Bryce Harper's behind door number 2, you feel a little bit better about moving on.
Right, absolutely. And the one I totally agreed. There's so many variables there because, look, like you said, I mean, hey, shortstop, is Polanco a shortstop? If you have a shot, if you can get a shortstop right now, that's a better defender, does Polanco not make more sense at second base? I think he gets to a lot of stuff. I think he showed some improvement. He also still bounces some throws that look like they should be made. I mean, it's not flawless, but it was definitely better. There's no question.
I think there's some arm strength there, though, don't you? That
the arm strength is very good, and that's why you stick with it. I think, especially if you can get that bat at shortstop. That's a great plus. This is not the era where we were at 20 years ago where the A-Rods and the Jeters.
Yeah.
We're trending back towards a good hitting shortstop is a good thing. I know there's still some stars out there short, and obviously with Correa and Seager, who was obviously not there this year, and the Dodgers still played that well anyways. But at the same time, if you can get Polanco hitting there, even if it's a 10-homer bat, but a 330, 340 on base, I'd take that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I'm kind of a Polanco to second guy, to be honest with you, especially given how, if you have any questions about the range, arm, accuracy, the internal clock, which used to be my problem with Polanco, he was like the quarterback that would hang on to it for a beat too long and get sacked from the blind side 10 times in a row. For me, I think you can cover second base so much easier in today's major leagues because of all the shifting that goes around, and the tough lefties that are going to really punish the ball. That's cool. You're playing in short right field anyways, or you have coverage there. Maybe your third baseman swinging over. It's like I think Brian Dozier took a step backwards defensively, and the Twins did fairly well to cover it. No one was really talking about it, but then Logan Forsythe came in, and I thought he was a step forward. I thought he really was good at turning the double play. The arm strength was plus. There was a lot to like about that move defensively for the Twins. The long and short of it is that Polanco is another one that I respond to other variables. I say if you can go get a shortstop, move him to second base and don't think twice about it. If shortstop's such a premium this winter and you can't do better than that, well, maybe just sit tight and Polanco can play short. You fill the gap at second base. Maybe Nick Gordon's there someday eventually, and eventually Royce Lewis. plays into the middle infield. But that kind of conversation, to me, is getting 2 or 3 years ahead of ourselves. I think you've got to focus on 2019 and filling that starting roster.
But, there was really no point last year where the Twins had even a good infield defense. It was kind of miserable. Even though the metrics showed that they were okay, even when, if you felt out Paul Molitor on it, there were some holes there across the diamond. There were holes, and it just never got good. Especially like you said with Dozier, it was never up to. And there's a real good chance that he was playing hurt all along, and the pressure of the playing for free agency was forcing. Hey, I'm going to show that I am this warrior.
Sure,
it may have hurt him. It may have hurt him, and everywhere you looked, that infield defense. The only guy that I would have honestly wanted to take the whole time would have been Joe Mauer at first base.
Right.
Everywhere else, you get Eduardo Escobar. You took it because the bat was extremely good in helping the team. But he's not a shortstop to me every day.
Agreed.
And he's okay at third base, and he's okay at second base, although we didn't see him at second base all that much. But so, look, if you want to get the name of the game is run prevention.
Yes.
So if you can get a good shortstop and move Polanco to second, I'd be on board with that too, because I think that'd improve your middle infield defense significantly if you got a defense first. Obviously, you'd like to get somebody that could hit a little bit at short too, but it's
right.
There's not a lot, just like the same thing with Buxton center field. There's not a lot of those guys going around, and they get a ton of money.
Francisco Lindor is not exactly on the trade table this winter.
Yeah, I think, if the this is never happening.
Okay, we talked a little bit about corner outfield, Max Kepler. We talked about middle infield with Jorge Polanco and the question marks there. What, in your mind, Dan, and I'll let you go with this one, what, in your mind, is the biggest off-season need that the Twins should address, whether it's through free agency or through a trade, any means, whatever? How do the 2019 Twins need to be markedly different from 2018?
I want probably two more relief pitchers, really good relief pitchers. I want that bullpen. I really like what Trevor May has to offer. I really like what Taylor Rogers has to offer. I think that Hildenberger had a really rough second half, but I've seen enough there to trust that he can be a guy for me.
Sure.
But I want two guys that can come in and light things up, and then you can spread the wealth and not get in the situation where you're relying heavily on three guys. Look, we've seen it enough with teams that have 5-6 options. The Rays had how many? 8? It was ridiculous. So
Oakland A's had like 65 relievers at last count.
I think the A's actually had 27 relievers on the 25-man roster. I mean, it was so good, and you see how much it can carry a team. And I'm not subscribing to the opener theory on this. This isn't why I'm bringing it up.
Sure.
It's more just that's the way things are going. I think that you can make up for a lot of inequities that way by having a great bullpen. Obviously, you're going to have to fill in some arms towards the end of the year if that's the way you go.
Yeah.
They do have Fernando Romero, who is an interesting option in the minors, but I still think they hold out hope that he's a starter.
Yeah.
And so starters is a tough spot for them because you look at it and look, you always need starting help. Going in, obviously, Barrios and Gibson are their guys, and unless they decided that Gibson was an asset to move with 1 year left.
Yeah.
Odorizzi is a guy that they have. So you got 3 spots locked down. Then you have a bunch of candidates for the final 2. Pineda's there, but he's coming off of 2 surgeries now.
Right.
So what do you know what you're going to get from him? Because he has that potential to be a high, a guy that's – How did Thad put it last year in spring training?
The upper
southern
end of the middle or something like that?
Yeah, the southern half of the middle of the rotation or something like that, or of the upper portion.
The southern part of the upper portion of a rotation was like his way of saying mid-rotation starter.
Yeah, exactly. It was well dressed up.
Yes,
but
as only Thad can do.
Exactly. But you look at the group there. There's a solid group. I feel a lot better about, everybody was freaking out last year at this point, or not this point, but when Irvin Santana went down with his injury, everybody started to freak out over what they were going to do, because it was like, who could step in and fill the void? And I think that they should feel a lot better about who could fill the void at this point. Not saying that you know for certain anything about any of those rookies, but Cole Stewart made some strides. Zach Littell, maybe he profiles as a bullpen guy. You look around and there's just more depth. Fernando Romero had his moments. And Mejia looked, and that was the disappointing one, I think, for the Twins, just because he looked like he had taken a step forward there and learned how to attack guys and made some strides after, a up and down first season where he had to start in the minors.
Right.
There's a lot of talent across the way there where it's almost like, do you go outside and address it and get something more certain? But what's that cost? It's a very confusing time because they have so much stuff that you wonder what direction they go with it. And so that's why I think that the bullpen is the way you go, because you have money to spend. It wouldn't, obviously we're going to find out a little bit about Joe Mauer here soon.
You'd think.
And that's going to be a huge play a huge role here, because, if Joe Mauer retires, do you think about getting Mike Moustakas and locking down third base and then you move Sano to first? Or if Mauer's not there, you can definitely get more power, and I would subscribe to that heavily. I think they need someone to come in, and it's why they got Logan Morrison last year. I think you got to get somebody with a better maybe track record than that. For the price you got Logan Morrison at the time, I had no problem with it. It didn't work out well.
Yeah.
It did not turn out well. But there's no complaints about the way that the Twins spent their money last year. They, rather than getting Yu Darvish, they got 3 players for the price of Yu Darvish, and you think, man, that's a pretty good way to go about this, and they're going to really have a full roster, and then none of it worked. Lance Lynn was a disaster, but it's really, I'm glad that it's not my headache, because, man, this would be a headache kind of off season to me.
No kidding.
And they're excited about it, but, man, they really have to get a lot accomplished in a short amount of time after hiring the manager.
Right. That means you really got to trust your Jeremy Zolls, your Dan Adlers of the world to say, hey, we're going to be doing interviews basically all day, every day, and we're going to just live in the HR department so we can go through this hiring protocol. Why don't you get a jump start on free agency, on trades, and then just fill out the roster? We'll circle it back with you sometime around November 15th. Does that sound good?
Those guys were dealing with so much stuff, interviewing everybody as far as the managerial hire. They got it done in 24 days. They had 20 to 24 candidates they started with. They talked to 5 or 6. We never got a 6th name, but there may have been a 6th candidate. 3 got second interviews. Obviously, a couple may have gotten even third interviews. I know that every time somebody would come in town, it basically took up a day. I know that Derek had to go out of town for a personal reason in the middle of it. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on, and you slammed it into 24 days, and it was definitely whirlwind. And you're absolutely the great part is that what I like about their setup is you have these pro scouts, veteran pro scouts. You have the Mike Radcliffes. You have a really good group to balance out your analytics department, which is coming along and producing really good information. I like having that. They did a good job in who they retained when they went to this direction with, a couple years ago, hiring Derek and Thad. They kept the key guys that you'd want to keep in the scouting department who are responsible for a lot of this young talent that's here. And so I think that it's probably a good mix of guys to be counting on to get you prepared, but at the same time, it's still got to be very, very, nerve-wracking to know that it's November 1. We haven't even looked at a player chart yet, and go from there. It's
daunting. It's a daunting amount of work. And if you're into the opener, there'll be some guys that'd be interesting candidates. But as I told our mutual friends, Dan, as I told Phil Mackey and Judd Zulgad on a recent podcast episode, as soon as you sign Patrick Corbin, you're not going to need to worry about the opener for at least 3 of your starting rotation spots. So that takes care of 1.
Yeah, exactly. No, and it's intriguing. My goodness, if you have money to spend, and the Twins do have money to spend, there are so many ways you can go with this free agent class, and a lot of options out there. And, there's you would think that teams are going to spend. Obviously, the MLB contract renewed, teams have money as far as the television rights. The big ticket items are going to get bought and paid for.
Yeah.
What's going to happen with the smaller ticket items? Our team's going to spend and acquire these guys, and there's probably, again, going to be bargains to be had. I just don't think the Twins will go with the one-year route. I think they will go I think they learned a little bit about that this last year, that you need to have maybe one or two guys on that, but not a couple guys on that. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they're looking more at 2 and 3 year guys, and not super long commitments, but at least to the point where those guys want to be here and they're worried about the team as opposed to themselves.
Yes.
I think that was something they found out was not the right way to go.
That's right. And including one of their in-house guys that they did not talk extension with. I think that might have had an adverse effect on the clubhouse based on the word from the street anyways.
Absolutely. And look, Brian Dozier is such a guy, I mean, especially given what he's meant to the team, that you can understand why it would hurt him to not have those talks. I can very much understand why the Twins weren't going to have those talks. Look, you feel like you're pretty much taken care of at middle infield fairly easily, I think. And you're looking at a guy who's getting up there in age, and even though Brian wanted to say it, that there is no downside to careers. Aging, basically he proved it the opposite way this year. He got hurt. It did not look, he looked slower. And so, I mean, I get both sides, and it was not an easy situation to deal with. And I think Dozier made a really good run of it, but it's clearly affected him. It affected the team this year.
Yeah, I agree. If there were no downside to careers, there'd be a different second baseman in Los Angeles, and his name rhymes with Base Butley.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
We see how that happened. Time gets us all, Dan.
It does. It does. In fact, the other day when I stubbed my toe, it hurt more than it would have 5 years ago. So.
I'm sorry for your discomfort, but it is a perfect illustration that player aging curves are very real.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that is the perfect. I think we went really deep there with our scientific research on that one.
Well, hey, anecdotal evidence is evidence. So anyway, that's a great chat, Dan. I appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for talking with us, for hanging out throughout the season, and thanks for coming on the Touch 'Em All podcast.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Cheers.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. TCL launched a new lineup of award-winning 4K Roku TVs to deliver the best sports, movies, TV shows, and thousands of streaming channels. TCL's personalized home screen makes it easy to customize your TCL to fit the way you watch. Binge watch what you want, when you want. TCL delivers excellent picture quality, sleek design, and stunning resolution at an affordable price. TCL, America's fastest-growing TV brand, is available at major retailers everywhere. Learn more at TCLUSA.com.
I'm Rita Foley with an AP News Minute. President Trump wants to end the constitutional right to citizenship for some children born in the U.S., the children of non-citizens. He says he's been told he can do it with just an executive order. The president is sending more than 5,000 troops to the Mexican border as a caravan of immigrants continues moving toward the United States. Customs and Border Patrol spokesman Andrew Meehan.
CBP has encountered a combination of almost 1,900 persons apprehended crossing our border illegally or presenting without documents at ports of entry.
Critics call it a waste of taxpayer money. The president goes to Pittsburgh today to console a grieving community after 11 people were shot dead there Saturday at a synagogue. But some say the president is divisive and shouldn't visit. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders.
Some individuals, they're grieving, they're hurting. The president wants to be there to show the support of this administration for the Jewish community.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. I'm Rita Foley.